So welcome to the Practice Makes Progress podcast. I'm your host, Dan Coles, a practice educator in the psychological professions. So today we have a special guest, Fred Macmillan, a counsellor working within the Counselling for Depression pathway at TALKWORKS. Fred has a varied route to his current role in the primary care NHS talking therapy service, and I'm really eager to learn about his journey and his insights. This podcast, just as a reminder, is aimed at staff in training posts and newly qualified professionals that are embarking on their preceptorship. So one of our key goals is to highlight the often overlooked aspects of Devon Partnership NHS Trust, showcasing the experiences of dedicated practitioners like Fred. So in this episode, we'll explore the essential work that Fred engages in, the challenges that are sometimes faced in the field, and what a typical day looks like. We'll also discuss Fred's career journey and his favourite therapeutic techniques, and he'll share practical advice for those starting their careers in this area. So let's dive in and learn from Fred's experiences in counselling and mental health. Hey Fred, welcome to the podcast.
Hi Dan, thanks for having me.
Very nice to see you. I suppose to get started, I wondered if you could just share a little bit about the kind of work that you're currently involved with.
So I'm part of the counsellor team at TalkWorks and the Torquay team, and as Johnny's already said in previous podcasts, we're a primary care psychological therapies service for Devon, and the therapy that we offer is called person-centered experiential counselling, and at the moment that's offered to adults as a step 3 therapy, where depression is considered the main presenting diagnosis. In terms of where person-centered counselling is a bit different to a lot of the other therapies offered at TalkWorks, the idea is that the relationship is the primary means for therapeutic change, for therapeutic growth. That hopefully that if therapist and client can build a trusting relationship where the client feels understood, accepted, and valued, then they in turn will hopefully value themselves more, understand themselves more, hopefully trust themselves more, and be themselves more. That we kind of see psychological distress rooted in becoming detached from ourselves and struggling to process our life experiences.
That's great, and it's really interesting to hear about. And I suppose recognising that TalkWorks is a really large service, and as you've mentioned already, Johnny's done a previous podcast that kind of looks at the service as a whole. But it's really interesting to hear about the sort of slightly different ways of working that kind of make up the different pathways of care within TalkWorks. I'm interested to know a little bit about what some of the common pressures or challenges might be in your role, do you think?
Well, I've sort of touched on kind of one already, which is that it's a different therapy to I'd say to a lot of the other therapies, and that whereas most of the step 3 therapists seem to have a kind of CBT training initially, and then that most of the counsellors don't come in kind of some of them have been PWPs, but it's a therapy that in its sort of foundations doesn't use a kind of medical model to understand human distress. And so I think that there can be part of the kind of challenge of being a counsellor in the NHS full stop is trying to help people understand that we work in a slightly different way, that as much as possible, unless clients want to bring labels of depression or anxiety, we kind of, unless they're bringing it, we're trying to leave that at the door as much as possible. And that, again, trying to kind of communicate that, again, that we're a bit different, that first and foremost, we're saying that the relationship we form as opposed to the techniques that we use are what as how we think that we can help clients. And while there's been kind of, as there's been more counsellors have joined the team, joined TalkWorks generally, and doing kind of talks to the team about person-centered counselling, and people and other colleagues really sort of trying to kind of get to grips with it. understand it more. I think that is kind of slowly happening more, but it's an ongoing process of people kind of interested but knowing very little and trying to I guess sort of how do I give more exposure to person-centered counselling, and so we kind of feel more understood within the service, and so that kind of things like that step ups are kind of are the right fit, or that kind of trying to find the right CPD is the right fit as well, because I guess it's just not as well known really within TalkWorks the whole.
Yeah.
And I guess that's the other kind of main challenge. I guess like lots of the psychological therapies generally, is that it can be draining work. It's empathizing with clients drains my own empathy, and I want to make sure I'm being fair to all clients and giving us kind of that clients aren't getting kind of much more of myself than others. I mean, it's sort of slightly unavoidable, but and that I'm also there for my colleagues and other bits of work, and also for my personal life, for me, for my family, for friends. So I think that's the sort of challenge, is that trying to balance. That I think I remember hearing a kind of good analogy that kind of we all have a cup of empathy, and some is bigger than others, but it's not inexhaustible. And at some point it will be drained if you kind of don't top it up enough.
Absolutely. Yeah. They're trying to find that balance that's right for you when you're engaged in work that has that very strong emotional focus, and you're delivering or engaging in a lot of kind of empathetic reasoning and thought, but also at the same time it sounds like trying to carve out that sort of professional identity as quite a small team within the TalkWorks service, and letting people know about the work that you do and how it functions, and that's helping to sort of direct the right kind of clients into that pathway.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when I joined with a lot of new counsellors at the same time, and we're now a team of, I think, 17. But I think before that it was a team of before that I think it was a team of 4 or 5 before. So it's really
I remember, 4 or 5 counsellors. Yeah, amazing. So it's a lot bigger than I think it is.
Yeah, it kind of and there's kind of at least one of us in each team, usually 2, but I'm the only one in Torquay.
Okay. Great. So I suppose with that in mind, and this might be a tricky question to kind of answer, but thinking about what a typical week or a typical day might look like for you, is there a sort of rhythm to the work that you're doing?
I guess it's the kind of the bread and butter of the client work. There's that I'm 4 days a week, so I've got 16 contacts. So there's as well as client work, but it's also the other things that we get involved with as well, because obviously there's obviously supervision. But one of the things I really enjoy doing is offering reflective practice to PWPs. As if you don't mind me sharing, I was
no, please do.
That facilitated the group that you were in, and that's something that I really enjoy being able to kind of bring person-centered practice into supporting colleagues, getting to know more about the service, getting to know PWPs, because otherwise I have very little interaction with PWPs, because apart from kind of emails about does this person look like a good fit for CFD, and so it's kind of helps me feel more connected to the service, being able to offer support like that. And then there's obviously things like clinical support requests that a lot of it's very similar to what other high intensity therapists are offering. And I also line manager volunteer as well, as that's a kind of year-old project that that TalkWorks has started doing with volunteers in the service.
Amazing. This sounds like quite a varied role, and I obviously distinctly remember that reflective practice group, and it was one of my favourite sessions, I think, just coming together. And I think what you did a really good job of actually was that sense of just creating that balance between us all just being human beings in that room, or on Microsoft Teams, but it felt like we were in a room. and really just everybody feeling very comfortable to be able to unpack and explore what was going on in that moment. And it was, yeah, I think one of the things that really helped to bolster my own sense of resilience, because it's hard work, isn't it? Engaging in any kind of therapeutic discipline, I think it can be tough at times. And having that lovely bit of space to just take pause and reflect was incredibly valuable to me. It was really lovely to spend that time with you and the rest of the group.
Oh, I'm glad you found it helpful. I mean, I think that it seems that I think that's common to all kind of helping professions, but to psychological therapies generally, is that it is, regardless of the modality, it's draining, and I think that, and there might be in different ways, or kind of, but that it feels like I could have been I'm kind of trying to thinking about rolling out reflective practice more widely, but because acknowledging that whether your admin taking the first call, or whether your PRP first appointment, or an HI or employment support, is that it can all be really draining, and the reflective practice can really support everyone who works at TalkWorks, who has any interactions with people who are really struggling.
Absolutely, it has that power to be restorative, or at least to kind of demonstrate a sense of understanding and empathy, just like we would to our clients. So it sounds like the sort of the counselling role within an NHS talking therapy service, it's growing, but it's still almost sort of feels quite niche. I'm wondering a little bit about your career journey and how you ended up in your current role.
Well, I mean, long before being a therapist, I was trained. I was doing legal training, and but it was a really bad fit. Like I was kind of like I was not good at the job, and I didn't really feel like I was being me doing the job. But because it's such a kind of competitive environment, that I think I kind of had this sort of tunnel vision. I've just got to keep going, and actually, although it didn't feel like at the time, saving grace, I got was being sacked from the firm that I was training at, which then gave me the opportunity to pause and go, this isn't right. So I had to think about. So I started thinking about, well, what will I actually enjoy doing? What will I actually be good at? What's actually going to be a fulfilling life for me? And I had really enjoyed at uni being welfare officer and being a Nightline volunteer. And there's also a history of mental health problems in my family. So I feel really passionate about people having access to mental health support, especially regardless of whether they can pay or not. And kind of the more I kind of learned about therapy, it particularly, I guess, with a kind of person-centered way of working, I thought this is a career where I get to be me. It's like where it's actually it's not as helpful to be honest. I need to be honest with it. I think that was the kind of, I was trying to do a career where I wasn't myself, and this was an opportunity to actually kind of live and work in a way that felt true to me. So that's how that's the journey I entered with therapy training. And then so after I qualified, I was in private practice for a kind of really short period, but kind of throughout training. But I actually found private practice quite lonely, and I really wanted to be part of a team. So that was kind of one part of it, and also that, as I said, it's really important to me to be able to offer therapy regardless of whether someone can pay for it or not. And obviously, the NHS is the place that's most easily accessible for people to get health support. And but I remember in our training that the vast majority of people training end up in private practice. You hear kind of stories of, you'll never get in the NHS if you don't do cognitive behavioural therapy, so don't even think about it. And I remember having that conversation. Luckily, I had one of our teachers said, no, actually, I worked as a person-centred counsellor within the NHS, and there is a pathway. So don't let anyone tell you can't do it. And that was huge for me, having thought that, you know, had this sort of sadness, I would love to work in the NHS, but it's not possible. And then finding out that it was, and then I moved down to Devon with my family for kind of to be closer to my wife's family. And TalkWorks popped up as a job, and I thought, well, this is it. This is the kind of it's kind of the stars really aligned for me.
Yeah, great. That's great. And I think what's really interesting about this podcast, I'm meeting lots of very interesting people, and that we can often get stuck. And I think a lot of learners sometimes will contact the practice education team and they'll ask about a specific route into something, a nice linear pathway into clinical psychology or counselling and working within an NHS service. And I think what's really interesting is the people that we talk to have taken quite varied routes into any kind of therapeutic discipline that they might be working in. People have come to it a little bit later in life, often having been through sort of trialing a different career option, finding that that wasn't really a very good fit, and that being the impetus for them exploring alternative options. And you know, that's very similar to kind of my own story in terms of getting into sort of therapeutic work from various different jobs that I've done in the past. And so it's really lovely to hear about your journey today, and just to think about I suppose that idea that sometimes we can feel quite limited by what we hear about the options that are available, and it just takes that one person, doesn't it, to say to you, well, actually no, that is an option, just to give you that sense of hope and spur you on and give you that motivation to continue with what you were hoping to achieve. And look at you now.
Yeah, well, yeah. So at the end, if you're listening, Jane, thank you. But I suspect she's not. But
I hope she
do. But and I think that kind of thing about the linear route and what's the route to the certain profession that you and role that someone might want to do. For me, it feels a really important part of who I am as a person, as a therapist, that there was what felt like and still feels like to me a colossal career failure. That and whereas with other jobs that I would be I'd have to kind of cook up some reason about why I got sacked and would be worried about, you know, this being a kind of blemish. And whereas actually this is an enormous source of strength for me and how I work and how I can relate to clients, and that feelings of failing and of feeling lost and feeling resentful, all those things that clients bring to us. And for me, that's a kind of touchstone into myself, that, and if I'm not kind of relating to exactly what a client is bringing, but those kind of core experiences, core themes of experience that we have, and that, and when we're kind of one of the sort of biggest advice that I can kind of give to, you know, people who want to train as therapists is to, you know, lean into our vulnerabilities, lean into what really hurts, because then we can relate to our clients' pain so much more.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, allows us to be able to show up authentically and tune into our own experience at the same time. And, you know, offering and bringing yourself as a truly authentic person is that foundation for building a strong relationship, right?
Absolutely. When that's literally one of the 6 necessary and sufficient conditions of the person-centered therapy, to say that within a therapy relationship, if the therapist is genuine and that is communicated to client experience, the therapist is genuine as a person, not just kind of being behind a kind of professional mask. That is one of the parts of a relationship that can feel safe in.
Yeah. You may have answered this question already then, Fred, but thinking about any kind of favorite therapeutic skills or techniques, things that you find yourself gravitating towards, that can be in the therapy room or at home for self-care.
I think part of what I find, why person-centered therapy is so important to me is that at its core, it's less techniques and it's a kind of way of being, it's an attitude, and that's what I carry into my life, what I'm like with my family, what I'm like with myself, what I'm like at work, whether that's colleagues and crucially with clients, that first and foremost, I'm trying to offer the chance to kind of relate at depth with a client, and the kind of the the other sort of conditions of person-centered approach. There's sort of psychological contact, a client being in a kind of state of incongruence or distress. We've already talked about sort of the congruence, the genuineness of the therapist, but also the other ones being that the therapist experiences what's referred to as unconditional positive regard. I think it's quite a clunky term, but for kind of to value and prize the client, to offer, to experience kind of empathy, to empathic understanding of the client, and then finally that they experience that themselves, that you communicate that to them, that they feel understood and they feel valued. And in a way, kind of, it's not that helpful to break them up because they're all part of the same thing, which is kind of relational depth. And that where someone comes into the counselling room and feels like they matter, feels like that another human gets them when they don't feel like they are got by other people. And I think what's exciting for me about that is that it's a kind of to become a kind of half decent person-centered therapist is sort of so it's probably sort of not that challenging. To become an excellent person-centered therapist is a kind of ongoing life quest that probably never gets fulfilled, because it's just about developing as a person, developing about understanding ourselves and understanding what our blind spots are, what stops us from valuing people, from understanding people, and that that in a way, ways of developing a person-centered therapist as much as kind of thinking about ways of facilitating emotion focus. In some ways, it's as important to read, to speak to people, to listen to music and connect with what hurts, to journal, to sort of develop as a person as much as a kind of clinical skills. I'm sort of thinking of that. I'm not sure if it's actually a line from Yoda. I think it's potentially kind of a apocryphal thing, but the idea is saying that simple it is, easy it is not.
That's great. That's great. And that feels like a fantastic kind of final message, I suppose, in our discussion today to share with our listeners, a really poignant point. And I'm just, I suppose, sort of as we're wrapping up the session today, I just really want to extend a heartfelt thank you to you, Fred, for sharing those valuable insights and experiences with us today. It's been really enlightening to hear about your journey in counselling and some of those challenges that you faced, and also thinking about I suppose the core kind of principles of person-centered therapy, and how you're enacting that in your kind of day-to-day life, beyond the sort of therapy room, it sounds, and doing a lot of self-work as well. What's really clear is that your dedication to supporting individuals who are perhaps struggling in some ways really inspiring, and I'm sure that those people listening who are either kind of coming towards the end of their training or embarking on that first year post qualifying will find that practical advice and the sort of personal reflections really, really valuable. A final message for our listeners. So if you would like to contribute to the podcast in any way, just drop us a line at the Practice Education inbox. We'd be really happy to hear from you, always looking for new ideas. But remember that practice, it is a journey, and every step that you take is a really valuable one. So thanks for joining us today, and until next time.